Today's show is brought to you by AWS Insiders, a new, edgy, entertaining podcast from CloudFix about the future of cloud computing on AWS. On every show, your hosts Hillary and Rahul not only bring on top industry guests, but they also debate the most contentious topics in the industry. It's a great back and forth, and every episode includes a really interesting AWS use case. We checked out AWS Insiders, and we were super impressed with not only the quality of the guests, but also the depth of experience on both sides of every discussion. Search for AWS Insiders in your podcast player. We'll also include a link in the show notes. My thanks to AWS Insiders for their support.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Aaron, last show you and I are doing for the year-end mailbag. Excited to kind of get to this one. We get a lot of questions from people throughout the year.
Yep. And it's also interesting too, because, we're also, again, second week in a row, not necessarily doing cloud news. We're just going to kind of run straight into mailbag for the year. And like you mentioned, we get a lot of questions and a lot of feedback, and that is fantastic. And so we went through and we kind of picked 10 of the best ones for the year. And in kind of looking through and preparing a little bit ahead of time for this one, like some of the, at least on my side, the answers are going to be maybe interesting. We shall see.
Yeah. But we grabbed about 10. Like we probably get 100 or so questions a year. Well, all sorts of stuff. I will say, we're always happy to answer questions. You can always send us questions to show@thecloudcast.net. I think that's in the show notes as well, at the bottom of the show notes for everyone. If you ever have questions, feel free to send us some. I think that a lot of them we get are, hey, can you introduce us to somebody? Can you give us some advice on something? Hey, maybe it'd be cool to cover this topic. Like those are all great. Always happy to help with those. And if we can make an introduction to somebody, happy to do that. The hardest ones for us are the ones where somebody just sort of says like, hey, can you help me find a job? Or, again, not that we don't necessarily want to help or we've met a lot of people, just there are tons and tons of other services that are much more expedient and, plug you into all the actual hiring processes. The other one that's a little tough for us is when people say, hey, can you recommend me for something? And if we don't know you, I'll be real honest. And I think Aaron, you're the same way. Like, we're hesitant to just sort of recommend people that we've never worked with, just the same way we would do for anybody. You're kind of putting your reputation on that. You're kind of vouching for somebody, and just to be fair to all of us, at least my personal way of doing it, Aaron. I don't know if you're any different. Just we're a little hesitant on that, but again. For everything else, always happy to try and answer questions. We do our best to get back to them as soon as possible. So, a lot of the questions that we're going to cover today, I think we covered about 10 or 12 or something like that. We tried to pick and kind of pick from a bunch of different things, some technology, some career advice, some economy, some, just sort of future looking stuff. So we're going to get to a bunch of those and we'll get to them right after the break.
It's our mission to give IT pros a break. So here it is. We wish it was longer, but to keep saving IT pros time and money, we only paid for a 30-second ad. From racks and PDUs to backup power, Eaton and Tripp Lite have joined forces to bring more sanity to your day every day. Visit eaton.com/audio today.
Looking to scale up your data storage capacity to meet growing demands? Fujifilm Tape is the foundation of a modern data strategy. Tape is a trusted data storage solution that grows alongside your business, helping you adapt to ever-changing data management needs. Providing ultimate security, the physical air gap can bring you peace of mind when it comes to storing information long-term safely and efficiently. Fujifilm has been innovating the manufacturing of tape for many years, creating generations of data tape that modern businesses can rely on. So what are you waiting for? Get started building your data storage strategy on tape today at builtontape.fujifilmusa.com. That's builtontape.fujifilmusa.com.
And we're back. And so, Brian, I think it's best to kind of start off with a question for our mailbag episode here that talks a little bit about big shifts. right? So I'll read the question, and then you take first crack at an answer, and then I'll do an answer, and then we'll kind of rotate from there if that's cool with you.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Sounds good.
So number one, the cloud has created a lot of big shifts over the last 10 years. Are there any big winners over the last 10 years that you see being disrupted anytime soon?
Yeah, that's a good question. So maybe let's just start with sort of what the big shifts have been. We've seen the rise of public cloud. We've seen multiple companies be multi tens of billions of dollars in public cloud. So Amazon, Azure, Google, Salesforce. We've seen SaaS become a major thing. We have seen the rise of, and this is a little more than 10 years, it's probably more like 15 years, but the rise of the smartphone and really sort of the destruction of the previous BlackBerry, Nokia world. It's now very much Apple and Android. We've seen the advertising world sort of become essentially Google and Facebook for the most part. I'm trying to think what other really big trends we've seen over the last decade or so. We've obviously seen work from home. We're going to touch on that in a later one. I think it's always interesting, I guess, if I think about this, of all those things I sort of talked about. So the advertising, I think. So let's just take like the online advertising world, right? So it moved from, very, very web centric. It was, kind of general for Google, was huge, but there were some other players in that space. There were banner ads, there were stuff. It moved to much more of kind of the world in which you searched. So that became Google. It became how you did mobile search. So Apple became a player in that because of about iPhone. Facebook became a thing because that's where literally billions of people were talking. Amazon became a player in that place. So you did see some shifting of people beginning to like add search to stuff that previously everybody just sort of said, well, you start at Google and you go from there. So we saw some of that shifting where companies realized that enough things were going on and search could become an adjunct to what they did. I think, as we think about sort of the disruptiveness of that, as we've seen something here in the last year or so where Apple introduced, this thing where they give the users the ability to opt out of tracking. Essentially, I don't want to be ad tracked or I don't want my location to be tracked. That's created a significant dent, I guess, in the search world, right? We've seen, both Facebook and, Facebook lost like $10 billion and Google is trying to rethink some things. And, we're going to have a show coming up in which we talk about how things like OpenAI and some of these, was it suggestive text? I think it is. I think that's the right word. The way, sort of the AI text could start displacing this stuff. So I think to displace some of these really big things, it's going to require somebody who has established a fairly big footprint, in some other means, and they have some means of essentially kind of blocking or disrupting somebody else, right? And I use that in contrast to like last year. I recall, I went back and I looked at our notes. We just did the year-end wrap-up show this last week. Hopefully, folks had a chance to listen. But like we were looking at some of the trends from the end of last year, not the end of this year, the end of last year, and you had things like Cloudflare starting to offer, compute and storage, and they were trying to sort of get rid of networking charges. And it's a cool concept, but just hasn't been able to really take off and make material dents and things because they don't have the footprint to do that. So, I think there's possibilities. Aaron consistently bets that Azure is going to overtake AWS, but I don't think that's going to, displace AWS in the same way that like Apple and Android displaced Nokia. So, it'll be interesting to see. I think as we get into some of the shows, we're already starting to do the look ahead shows for next year. And by the way, just as kind of a teaser, they're bangers. You're definitely going to want to listen to those early look ahead to 2023s. I think there's a few things that are going to be potentially disruptive over the next few years, but to completely displace some of the things we used to do, I don't know. Those are really hard things to predict, and I don't know that I have a great answer for those.
Yeah. No, that's good. I'll add for mine. I'll add another trend that you didn't mention, which was more the rise of as a service. And for me, like if you look back, gosh, 10 years or so, right? You're looking at early reInvent kind of days. And we had a number of companies that were, I'll just refer to them as the first generation of as a service companies. Typically, they rose up specifically in the AWS ecosystem. So, I don't have any companies off the top of my head, or I don't necessarily want to name names and say like, oh, they'll be disrupted. But if you go back, 10 years ago and you look at who were the big sponsors at AWS reInvent, some of those turned into really, really large as a service companies, but typically in a niche, right? Or something that could easily be consolidated into a larger category. And I think that is an area in which you'll start to see disruption, as you'll start to see some of these early as a service companies start to really play in each other's pools, if you will.
Yeah. I think that the other sort of little nuance to that from an as a service is like, I think maybe we thought that there would be bigger consolidation around like SaaS services. There would be, these sort of aggregators of like small business SaaS services or aggregators of certain things. And I think what we've seen is, the proliferation of SaaS has overtaken the aggregation of SaaS. And, as we'll talk about in some other future shows, like those things are hard to sustain, to have 12, 20 things that all do the same thing. But I think maybe we misunderstood how easy it would be to sort of get those companies started, especially when money was really cheap over the last 10 years.
Agreed.
All right. Second question, and this is one that will probably get some folks angry about us. But why do you think so many people got the sort of crypto Web3 thing wrong in say 2021, 2022?
Yeah. Well, first of all, anytime we mention those words, we get angry feedback. So we'll just acknowledge that right up front. So, but I think there's a combination of two things. I think it was the fact that it was just so unregulated, combined with it was opaque. And so by not being regulated and not having any kind of oversight, and also not having transparency into it, it was a house of cards that was easily manipulated by those that were on the inside of it. And then it somehow built up momentum, and it built up enough momentum that it reached the mainstream. I hate to call it, a huge scam, but at the end of the day, I mean, you're looking at like the FTX collapse and some of these other things that are going on in the crypto industry right now. It's hard to think of it in any other way, really. Yeah.
I mean, I think the other thing is I don't know, people have different, I don't know that either one of us were really that much into the sort of cryptocurrency tracking. I think we were legitimately kind of looking at it as like, what do these new distributed technologies mean? And I think, where we may have gotten burned a little bit is even, for some of the guests that we had on that, we thought we're going to be doing more education around Web3. Things always kind of drifted back to cryptocurrencies and what that meant. And so, I think the jury's still out on what the underlying technology is. I know you're still sort of bullish on blockchain. Blockchain. Yeah, absolutely. I had Bitcoin on the mind, but yeah, blockchain. But yeah, I think we're still trying to figure out what those are. And I think it is still somewhat hard for folks to articulate maybe what those use cases are. And either that or the ones who are good at articulating the use cases get completely drowned out by the sort of noise of cryptocurrency. So yeah, of all the things we've done on this show, that might be the biggest one that we're just sort of like, yeah, that one we got into OpenStack and serverless, and they've had their ups and downs, but I don't think we missed on anything as much as we missed on crypto and stuff this year.
Fair. Absolutely. So move on to question 3. Why don't you guys cover more about application modernization and migrations? Isn't that a huge part of IT group portfolios and budgets?
This is a big question. This is a question that we get a lot. We get a lot of, we get variations of this question too. We get the, hey, we're a big, SAP shop or a big Oracle shop. Why don't you guys talk more about, either those clouds or, how would I migrate a big, SAP HANA system. And I think the reason is pretty simple. So your second part of your question is right. Isn't that a big part of IT budgets? Yes, it is. Or even not even, those two things, but just, kind of existing applications, whether you call them legacy or heritage or whatever you call them. I think the reason we don't do that so much is kind of twofold. One, the kind of companies that specialize in that stuff tend to be more consultative type of companies. And we do get those kind of companies that reach out to us a bunch and say like, hey, we'd like to talk about this. And I think what we've historically found is the answer is more often than not all the time, but more often than not, if we were to take a use case and just sort of go like, hey, what would it take to migrate this? More often than not, the answer is it depends. And I think we've found that historically, we've done it a few times. You folks don't love hearing consulting talk. And I don't mean it in a negative way, but just, I think you come to the show looking for like, hey, I'm getting some tangible stuff and then I can go do my own homework. And I think with consulting, just the nature of it is like, hey, it's going to depend on how janky that old application is, what dependencies that application is. What are you trying to get out of it? And so we've sort of just avoided it because I think we would get to the end of shows and either we would talk about one specific, kind of application modernization, and somebody would come back and go, no, I want this or I want that, or we would get a little more, hey, it depends than people would really like, or that we'd feel good about kind of giving to you. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Do you have any other thoughts? I know we've talked about it before, but we just tend to pass on those a lot.
Well, so this is literally what I wrote down in my notebook. It's boring and it depends.
Yeah.
But the why is because everyone's situation is different. And I did want to say that is the whole reason for the consulting approach to all of this, is because it's hard, on a podcast like this, to describe a consulting approach that may or may not apply to a lot of the listeners.
Yeah. I think the other part of it is, maybe it's boring. I think the people that are in that space would argue like it's pretty profitable. It's not a bad business to be in. I think the other part of it is it's so hard to sort of know what outcomes are going to be. And, that might be a little bit of a scapegoat, because you could say like, well, you don't always know what it's going to be like if you do Kubernetes or something too, which is totally fair. It's just, for us to sort of say like, hey, what kind of app modernization or migration should we talk about that, people could get done in a year? Let's say that's the timeline, or 6 months. Okay, that's going to narrow some things down. And then, will it be successful? Because I think, unfortunately, if we've learned anything over the last 10 sort of years, like, migrations and so forth, like your mileage might vary. Some work really great and some don't. And so it's hard to genericize all those types of things.
Good. All
right, enough of that. Next question. Let's see. Has the shift to widespread remote work been a good thing or a bad thing? It's a good question.
Yeah, this is a good question. So I think it's been a good thing, but I also think it may eventually turn into a bad thing. And the reason why I say that is because I don't think it's over. During COVID, of course, the pendulum swung very hard towards remote work. And we are starting to see, especially this year, more and more organizations trying to do, return to the office in some way. Some are using the carrot model, some are using the stick model, but you're seeing very mixed results. And you're seeing a lot of folks that just plain don't want to go back into the office. Now, I do think it's a good thing from the fact that you don't just need to be like, oh, you're in the valley, but you're working from home. The ability to really work from anywhere has been the best part about all of this. But I also completely admit, and I know I've said it on the podcast before, that the worst part pre-pandemic, and now we're starting to see it again, is in the day job. Folks who go back into the office and you have a critical mass of folks in the office, and then everyone gets in a conference room on a bad speakerphone. And then you're one of the few remote employees and you can't hear and you can't see. And at that point, it becomes a bad thing. And so What I do worry about is I think things will settle into something different, but I do think the pendulum will shift back more towards return to the office before it settles down.
Yeah, I think so. I think, yeah, I think this is one of those questions. I mean, like, here's the thing. Like, if somebody had asked you and I this question 7 years ago, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, we would have said, like, remote work is fantastic, at least where you and I are, because you and I aren't in, Silicon Valley or Seattle or Boston or, couple, or even like London or so, one of the sort of hot spots for it, because we've been able to have successful careers, not be there. Yes, it's had some challenges. We were, you and I would get on airplanes. We racked up lots of frequent flyer miles. And I think for a while, those of us that were remote people all, we could walk through all the, like, what are the negatives? Like you said, you're the one person on the conference call, you're having to do odd hours and stuff, but you're like, yeah, I'm willing to put up with it. But I don't know. I think it'll be really interesting to see what'll happen for those that haven't lived through this for a long time. Right. Like you said, like if you've been a Silicon Valley person for a long time and you're used to, driving down the 101, going in a building, doing whiteboarding with people, like whatever the new culture is out there amongst everybody kind of getting together, and that goes away. And then maybe you moved away or whatever. I think that's going to be sort of interesting. So yeah, I think like you said, we're going to see a pullback to try and come back, especially as companies try and justify having office space. I think that's going to have a big economic impact on stuff. So yeah, I feel like, I think you're right. I think the jury's out. It was great during the pandemic because, literally people lived because of it. They didn't have to go interact with people. But I think, yeah, you're right. I think the burn back, the come back to earth on this could be harder than people expect.
Agreed. Okay. Question 5. What advice would you give someone in their 20s, 30s, or 40s that would help them for the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah. This one we get a lot, not necessarily always age specific. We get a lot, and I'm hoping you'll jump in on this as well. I think, and this is sort of I'm going to bias this a little bit by saying one of the things that I consciously never did in my 20s, 30s, or 40s, and I had a whole bunch of opportunities to do it, was to say, hey, I'm going to move to California. I'm going to move to Silicon Valley. And I say Silicon Valley, insert whatever sort of tech hub, fits in where you are. It could be Bangalore, it could be London, it could be Seattle, it could be whatever. But basically personally never went through the thing where it was like, I'm willing to give up what I think is, a better work-life balance, better place to work, more reasonable place to work, in order to be in the center of stuff, and be able to be like, hey, there are jobs all around me. So if I don't love this one, I'll go to the next one, and I could be on the next sort of hype train. So I'll bias everything I'm saying based on, the experience I have, not having been like, I got on that roller coaster and it worked or it didn't work. I think when you're in your 20s, and again, this is, I say this speaking from before, but I feel like when you're in your 20s and you're fairly new, unless you're like, look, I'm a really hardcore engineer. I really want to write code. But I think what ends up happening is at some point you're like, I don't totally know what I want to do in this industry. Like, people tend to choose to be in the industry. And so I think when you're early on, be flexible, try and find a few things that you're good at, be good enough to where, people will hire you, as opposed to the expectation. I think when we were younger, there was kind of an expectation that, like, they would bring you on board, they would train you, they'd have these sort of new hire training programs. Nowadays, I think the expectation is like, you're capable on day one, which makes it really hard when you're in 20. So it means you got to pick something. Hopefully you're going to probably stick with the thing that you started doing in college. And I think, what you want to be doing, especially in your 20s, is figuring out, A, do you want to be in this industry? B, are there other parts of the industry that are interesting to you? Have you gotten to know people in those other parts of it? So, I think exploration in your 20s is probably the most important thing, but exploration with sort of this foundation of, at least I'm really good at one thing that I can sort of market myself on. I'm a really good Java developer. I'm really good at some aspect of marketing. I can sell the hell out of stuff, whatever that might be. I think in your 20s, I think that's sort of good starting point. Do you want to take a stab at 30, or should I just take a big deep breath and work on 32?
Well, I was actually going to say mine. I took a slightly different approach to the question. Mine was I've got two things, but it applies to all the ages. So here's my thing is pick one. Either go learn FinOps, the financial side of everything and cost optimization side of everything, or go learn SecOps, the security side of everything. I really do feel like one of those two paths will become critical going forward. And I also think they're the next ones that if you have an understanding of that, like you were saying, like let's say you're a really good developer, but you understand the FinOps side, or you're a really good developer, but you understand the security side more than other candidates. I think it will really help your career and really give you a leg up, but it also gives you a better understanding on the FinOps side, of course, the business side of the house, if that's something you want to go into, but on the security side of the house, because obviously with everything going API driven and everything as a service and more and more workloads moving to public cloud, like the security side, I just think is one of those where you're going to kind of future-proof yourself as well. So I'll just answer that, and I'll kind of flip it back to you of mine was, doesn't matter how old you are, I would say go figure out which one suits your personality best and go after it.
Yeah. I think that works. I think the other big thing, probably somewhere in your 30s and 40s, assuming you decide to stick around, and I decided to stick around in the tech industry because I think at some point you decide this is either a life you want to be in, because it's a lot of hours. It's a hard life. It doesn't necessarily, it has booms and busts and all that sort of stuff. But assuming you decide to stay in it, I think at some point the real big thing that you decide is, do I want to keep being really good as sort of an individual contributor? So you've got great talent, great skills. Maybe it's as a developer, maybe it's as a project manager, maybe it's, whatever it is. Or do I want to be a manager? Do I want to manage people? Do I want to manage projects, budgets, those sort of things? And it's a really hard thing because on one hand, your sort of upward mobility probably grows some if you decide to take on managing stuff, managing people, managing risk, whatever it is. There may be more opportunity to make more money. But it is a weird feeling if you're very good at that skill set to go, I'm no longer going to be valued in my own individual skills. I'm going to be valued in how I bring people together. And I think it's one of those things it's a hard question for a lot of people. They're not totally sure if they want to do it. And sometimes they find out they're really good at it or they're really bad at it. But I think you want to figure out where you want to be on that side of one or the other. And then B, you want to figure out like whatever you choose, does the company you work for or even the company you create, do they offer you opportunities to succeed in that and do it for a long term? Because there will be companies out there who allow people to be very high level individual contributors, and others where it has sort of a ceiling and then everything is just management from there up. And so give that some thought. Look at other people, talk to people before you just go, oh, okay, I'm going to be a manager, or whatever that might be. So I think that's the other kind of big hurdle that people eventually get to in sort of the later, middle or later parts of their career.
Yeah, it's great advice. Great advice.
All right, next question. These economic shifts are freaking me out a little bit. Fair enough. The economy being a little soft, the interest rates being up. How should I think about them? Very open-ended question.
Yeah. Oh gosh. I think, there's probably a lot of our listeners. This is the first time they're necessarily going through this. I want to make sure I pose this in a way that, hey, this is your first time. yes, there is a certain amount of uncertainty coming up in the future. There is a certain amount of, things may go one way, they may go the other way. We don't know exactly what's going on. And for certain folks out there, I mean, that's hard. And especially it's really hard if you haven't come across this before. But I do think the biggest takeaway from all of this is this will eventually pass. Yes, there is absolutely probably going to be, some changes and some other things going on, and we'll come out the other side of it looking a little different. But from a macro level, there's not a lot you can do about it. But at a micro level, there is things you can do about it. And what I mean by that is making sure from a career standpoint, are you kind of stepping back and figuring out, is this where I want to be? Is where I am today the best place that's going to position me for the market I'm in or the job that I do? There is, moves people can make, or the flip side of that, there is sometimes something to be said for stability. And maybe it isn't time to move and it isn't time to take a risk. And so I think the biggest thing right now is awareness. Be aware of what is going on. Be aware that if this is the first time for you in your career, okay, maybe ease off the gas pedal a little bit and step back, be a little more analytical about all of this and make a decision based off of the best information you have. But then also all that information is going to shift, and you also can't freak out about the shifts in the situations because, some days the markets are up, some days the markets are down.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I think that's great guidance. The only other little bits that I would add is try and couple things, try and figure out what you can control and what you can't control. Right. Can you completely control your own job? If it's your company, yeah, maybe. But if it's not, what can you do? What aspects of it can you control? Can you control your attitude? Can you control the quality of your work? Can you control, the network that you have around you and the people that you can rely on either, to call for help or to do other things? Can you control how much you're spending at the time? Do you need all those extra things that maybe if you keep a little more dry powder, it gives you some flexibility if things get a little bit weird. So think a lot about what you can control versus what you can't control and focus on those things. And then, the only other thing I would say is, especially in the tech industry, panic moves much faster than sort of optimism. Optimism feels like it moves fast, and sometimes you're like, oh, I'm missing out on stuff. Panic moves infinitely faster. So, if you're starting to see things sort of panic and you're like, oh, okay, well, maybe it's got some time, at least historically, and again, we can never predict the future, panic from people who want their money out, who want to change things, happens fast. But I will say that, when things are down, people are incredibly motivated to kind of get the system back up and healthy again. So, it tends to crash kind of hard, or at least slow down very hard. And then there are all sorts of forces to try and get the world back to some sort of normalcy again, because it starts to involve the economy and politics and all sorts of other things. So it's an interesting ride. It's a roller coaster. Hang on.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Absolutely. All right. The next one we have is an AI one. I got to thinking about some of the new AI news, so like OpenAI, ChatGPT, things like that, that's been coming out. And this really seems like a big deal. Will it be as big as it potentially seems?
So I guess, step one to this is hang on for a couple of weeks. There will be much better answers. Our friend Sam Charrington, who runs the This Week in AI and ML show, is going to come on and do a look ahead with us. Sam is way, way, way smarter than us on all this stuff. So he'll be able to give us some good insights. I feel like at least the little bit that I've had a chance to see this stuff it does feel like a big step. It does. And I think we talked about this in the year-end show, like, some of these things, especially the stuff with some of the graphics and images and some of the tech stuff, feels like a really big step. Maybe it's just they finally have figured out, how to put a good interface on things. And sometimes that's huge. I would say this, two things. The way I guess I'm thinking about this is, there's an old saying, and I think maybe it comes from Bill Gates or somebody. It's like, you never get as much done as you think you could, like in a year, but it's amazing what you can get done in like 5 years. Like it's always more than you ever think. So, I think some of this stuff will be a big deal. I think the thing that'll be really interesting, and this is maybe a thought exercise over the next few weeks when things are slow, is just sort of start writing some things down. Like, what could this stuff improve? What could it impact? And sort of just, maybe make 2 columns. What could it improve on one side? What could it impact on the other? Start small, start going bigger. And that will help you have some sense of like, okay, if I can think about it this much, how much can other people think about it? And it'll give you a framework to start educating yourself about it.
I like that. I'm going to add 2 vectors that I think about this. So first of all, I think it is going to be somewhat disruptive. And so I listened to Sam's Twimmel podcast episode where he actually had the ChatGPT, and they did like a live podcast with it. It's actually pretty fascinating how they did all that. But I listened to that, and then the Software Defined Talk folks talked about it for a while as well, and kind of graded the Chat GPT in particular, and they kind of came to the conclusion that it's really good for, I'll use the term entry level or junior level work, because if you think about it, at least today, the conversational aspects of the AI technology, if you say, oh, create this kind of document or write something for me, it writes it at an entry level, right? Like it isn't super disruptive at a senior level or a higher level or a subject matter expert level, but it could displace a lot of the junior level work. Now, then I started thinking about that a little bit further and kind of said, because the cost of something like that is a couple cents. And no matter what you're paying somebody, it's going to be more than a couple cents. And so it's disruptive because it's cheaper. But then also, if it starts to actually displace junior level jobs, what happens to a career pipeline when there's no junior level jobs anymore? Now you need senior people, but no one's done the junior work. Yeah. And so I see a larger implication of this around careers. But then also I saw a thing, I think it was on The Verge, where right now ChatGPT costs, because they run it entirely in the cloud. I want to say it's Google Cloud, but they run it entirely on GPUs, and it costs like $3 million a day right now to run. That's a lot of VC funding to do, to keep something like that running. And so, there's this like, it's cheap at the lowest transaction level, but in the aggregate, it's super expensive. So there's like a financial aspect of all of this that I'm slightly worried about. And then there's a career pipeline and career development and growth aspect that I could see it impacting.
Right. Yeah. And actually, speaking of that, we did another sort of look ahead show. We won't completely give it away, but we did get a chance to talk to some folks in the VC world. And they said, the way they think about it is like, not just, could it displace a call center person, but also like, could it be the foundation or, sort of critical infrastructure for, displacing something like search, which, already Google has said, hey, we are concerned about this stuff. So I think it's going to have some pretty broad ramifications, and some of them will be small and individual jobs, and some might go back to the first question we had, which is like, hey, which big things are going to topple and which things are going to change. All right, next question. We're getting close. I think we're going to do about 10 because we're going to run out of time before folks start getting really bored at this stuff. Okay, and I don't expect you to be able to get in somebody's head, but this is an interesting question. Why do you think Andy Jassy took the Amazon CEO job, which seems like a lot of headaches these days, when the AWS job was going so well? So if you had to put yourself, you had to guess what his thought process was, what do you think that might have been?
Well, I'll start it with people like that, and you'll notice I did not self-identify there. People like that are driven by just the biggest challenge in life they can possibly take on, right? They don't ever want to wonder, oh, if I could have just done that one next step. And, for me, this is all about some folks in life just have that drive to where there is no challenge too big. And by the way, I'm not, thinking that's a flaw in any way, shape, or form. I'm not criticizing that. We need those people.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm just saying I'm not one of them.
Well, and I tell you what, realizing that at some point in your life is a really important moment, because it's there are a lot of times when especially when you're younger, where it's like you're like, I really want to be the CEO. I want, or I want to be the big thing. And at some point you realize, like, either you have that drive or somebody else, is willing to get up earlier in the morning, do more work, do more homework than you are. And you'll reach that point. But yeah, I agree with you. I think it's just, there are people in this world that just have, a different level of wanting to take on challenges, and it's just insatiable. And they get to where they are for that reason. And it's great that there are some of those folks. And more power to them. Andy did an awesome job at AWS. So I'm sure Amazon, said, hey, let's give them a chance to do the bigger thing.
Agreed. Yep.
Two more.
All right. So this will be my last question. What do you wish you had done with your careers? Assuming you could go back and change one thing or multiple things. So basically, what would you do differently if you could have a do-over?
For a while there, there's times when I've looked back and I've gone like, oh, if I had done something earlier, like, I had a chance really early on in my career to have joined Cisco like 2 years earlier than I did. And, sometimes you will have done the math and you went, oh, well, they were giving out equity and the stock price was this, and boy, we would have made a lot of money. Right. So you've had a few of those moments where you were like, boy, if I had done something earlier, or if I had stopped doing something earlier and moved on to this other thing, in hindsight, like, that would have been that. I think looking back on it now, I don't know. I feel very, very fortunate to have had a lot of opportunities. I mean, in the big picture of things, I don't have a computer science background. I sort of learned some of this stuff. At least I learned enough of this stuff to survive. I had a lot of people along the way take a chance on me. I feel like I had a lot of jobs that, at least when I took them, I probably wasn't qualified enough, but somehow I convinced somebody that I could figure them out. And we've been fortunate enough to meet a lot of smart people. I mean, just if that very first couple of people, if the Christian Rileys of the world hadn't answered our Twitter DM and been like, yeah, why would I give these two losers who have no audience an hour of my time to listen? This whole thing wouldn't have happened, and we wouldn't have met all the people. So the more, the older I get and the more I look back on it, I don't know that I have any regrets that I necessarily would change. I think the adventure has been good. It was bumpy at times, but the adventure's been good.
Yeah, bumpy at times has been an understatement for both of us. We have stories. I'll kind of wrap that into my answer. So if we kind of combine the Andy Jassy question, and we were talking earlier about, advice in 20s and 30s, I wish there's, in my mind, I'm actually going to add on that question from earlier. There's this inflection point of individual contributor to manager, but then there's also another inflection point if you're are able to get the opportunity between manager and senior leadership, like E-staff kind of roles. And I wish I would have understood the differences of those, and to understand like a senior leadership track is different than a leadership track.
Yeah.
And without going into details, I have scars. And I probably, when I say I'm not that Andy Jassy kind of person, I know that, and I'm okay with that. But I also learned it the hard way. And so for me, I think if I would have had a do-over, I probably would have understood that. But also from a getting into technology or different areas sooner, I wish I would have, the podcast has been extremely helpful, but, in the day job, I wish I would have gone over to the cloud side or the SaaS side sooner in my career. The reason why I say that is because I do really believe there is a certain amount of time in seat of, you look at folks in our industry and they have, 5 years, 10 years, in these spaces, and what they have learned and the way that sets them up for the rest of their career, I think is just fantastic and it's admirable. And I really do think that those folks that took that opportunity early, that was great for them.
Yeah. I got one other thing that I just thought of, and this maybe fits into that, 20s, 30s, 40s things, or maybe it's a regret or a do-over. I think if you have an opportunity and you find somebody either in your company or somebody you meet in the industry that's willing to mentor you, and especially if they're willing to mentor you, not just in like, hey, teach me some technology or teach me a skill set, like, tell me about your job, but like if they'll teach you how the business works, like how, kind of some combination of like, here's how the industry really works, but more so like, here's how the business works. Here's how the politics of it. Here's how decisions get made. Here's, what you have to do for the things that you can't necessarily see. If somebody will mentor you on that or spend some time with you and you're inquisitive, that I think, especially if I had, learned that or knew that earlier on and found a really good manager to be attached to, I think that would have been really, really valuable.
That's good. That's good.
Who's got the last one, me or you?
I think it's you.
All right. Last question. This one is pretty open-ended. Hopefully it'll be short. We'll wrap it up. What are you thankful for this year?
Oh, wow. I'll answer it two ways. Professionally, I think things are really settling into a new normal. And we've talked about the various reasons why, remote work and some of these other things. And I'm really grateful and thankful for all of that. On a personal side, I know we've mentioned it once or twice on the podcast. Family health is always something that's super awesome to have. And, during COVID, we on my side of the house, we didn't necessarily always have that, and things are looking up, and that is something I'm extremely thankful for this year.
Yeah. I think for my two things, I guess work-wise, I would say, I'm glad people are getting back to events. It's good to see the people in our industry. I think we're lucky to be around a lot of smart people, a lot of good people, a lot of people that care a lot, and just good to see them. It's been a while since we've seen a lot of the people in our industry. And yeah, I'll kind of reiterate your same thing about on the personal side. I feel like for whatever reason, dumb coincidences, whatever. A lot of the people around me, not necessarily directly in my family, but people in my life, have had stuff that just, you were like, oh my gosh, that, like stuff that they didn't expect. It could be an injury, it could be health, it could be their car got stolen, it could be, a family member was, involved with that earthquake last week or whatever, that you realize that like stuff's pretty fragile, and appreciate every day that you get, appreciate, healthy days, appreciate healthy family members. You get a little older and you realize, you don't take those things for granted anymore. So I'm thankful for that stuff.
That's good.
Well, listen, man, I don't know how long we went for. We always say these last couple for the year are going to be long for many reasons. How long did we go this time?
Just in this half, we're like 45 minutes in. So,
all right. Yeah. All right. So this is going to be a long one for folks. I doubt anybody's listening at all at this point, but if you are, thank you for listening. Thanks for being a part of the community. Thanks for telling a friend. Thanks for sending in all these questions. They keep us busy throughout the year. We only do the mailbag like once a year, but happy to answer your questions again at show@thecloudcast.net if we can help you. So, Aaron, anything you want to wrap up for the rest of the year before we? I think we've got one more Sunday perspective. I think we're going to take a break for what would be the first Saturday or Wednesday of the year, and then we'll be back doing the look aheads for 2023, which, as I mentioned, are they've been bangers so far. The ones that we've already pre-recorded.
Yeah, agreed. And the only thing I would add is if you are still listening, and yes, we'd love to hear the feedback, and also if you do enjoy the show, please leave us a review as well.
Absolutely. Well, cool, folks. Thank you. Happy holidays. Happy New Year, and we will see you in 2023.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.